My name is Matt, and I will be talking to Pat Kua about tech leadership journey and scaling teams. Hey, Pat, I'm really happy to have you here today with me. Um, and I just wanted to start straight forward with my first question. So I really wanted to ask you, because you are from Australia, and I used to live in Munich, and only guys living in Germany from Australia were usually the visitors from the Oktoberfest. So you have to tell me the story. How come you landed in Germany?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, firstly. And you're right, is that I think probably most Australians are tourists. It's a long, long way from other places. But I started my tech journey in Australia. And for anyone who has worked in Australia or is currently working in Australia, even though it's a very large country, the tech industry is relatively small. Now, I've been working in tech for more than 20 years, so it was even smaller than what it was back then, or what it is today. And I ended up working for a company called ThoughtWorks. They're a consulting company, and I had an opportunity to do an exchange to the UK. One of the reasons why they had this exchange program was to promote more cultural exchange across different offices. Obviously, more networking across different offices. And I was personally really excited. If you spoke to a lot of Australians, especially back then, it was a rite of passage where everyone did at least a year or 2 years in the UK. There used to also be this visa called the working holiday visa. So you used to have a lot of Australians, often in the UK, called Antipodeans, other side of the world, working in pubs and various things like that. But I was lucky enough to work as a person in tech. The exchange program was supposed to be a year, and then it just turned into many, many years. And then, I worked in the UK for a long time. I think I was there for almost 12 years or so. And the reason I ended up in Germany was because I had a job offer from N26 to join as their CTO. And so part of that time, remote working was maybe not as accepted or as open as it is post-corona. And so I did move to Berlin, which is where I'm currently based. And that's how I ended up in Germany.
Great that you mentioned the ThoughtWorks. So to be honest, I'm really excited about your experience in this company because I'm following the ThoughtWorks for quite a while. And as you know, I run the consultancy, so I like to have a glimpse in their tech rather than their approach, like what they are releasing the reports. I think they are making an amazing job. And I'm wondering how this was impactful for you because you first work on a consulting side, right? Like outside of product companies, like helping a lot of probably the product companies. But I mean, like those consulting experience, how this shaped you and how this influenced maybe your next assignments, like with N26 or Near Mobility.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I did work for a couple of product companies beforehand, before joining ThoughtWorks. One of them was Oracle, and then another one was Flight Centre, which is a large travel agency in Australia. But I spent a lot of my time doing consulting. So I think I was at ThoughtWorks for, I think it was almost 14, 15 years. And over that time frame, I'm sure everyone will have recognized how much our industry has changed. I'm sure you've seen a lot of change as well over that time. And I was very excited actually to join ThoughtWorks. And the reason I ended up there was when I was at Oracle, I found myself working in a part of Oracle that was a bit more like an R&D lab, where we were actually experimenting with the very first early day XP or Agile type of concepts. So we were using the first version JUnit, automated test framework, first version cruise control, first continuous integration server out there. We weren't doing pair programming or anything as crazy as that. I really enjoyed working in those sorts of fashions because I could see a lot of the problems that we were facing that we were trying to fix using these tools, right? We were doing long releases. We had very painful build processes and very painful regressions. And so I understood where a lot of these things are coming from, and I wanted to work in an environment where I could do more of that. Now, back then, Agile and XP, especially extreme programming, was a little bit like dirty words, like you do never talk about, right? Because you talk about extreme programming in particular, business people would think you're like anarchists and, these are agile, this terrible thing. And it was just, a more effective way of working. I think today most people would want to be agile. They see that as a good thing, but back then it was not. And so I ended up at ThoughtWorks because they were known for doing more of the projects with Agile and XP, and actually was really lucky to work with different types of industries, lots of different clients across different sizes and scopes as well. And also see lots of different aspects of project life cycles. So everything from, starting fresh, sometimes then changing this old legacy system that has been around for 10, 15 years, helping clients with different initiatives over that time frame. A lot of them would have been going from, waterfall to agile ways of working, maybe introducing practices like automated testing, continuous integration. ThoughtWorks is known, or at least some of the authors, Dave Farley and Jess Humble, for continuous delivery. And, one of the projects where they invented a lot of those ways of working, or a group of people, rather, they published the book on it, but a group of people invented ways of working, which is now known as continuous delivery, helping people go down that path. And so, yeah, it really shaped a lot of my experiences because I was able to, help a lot of clients move in the right sort of fashion. B, I got to work in tech, which I really, really love. And C, I got to build a lot of different skills and experiences as well. I think to maybe answer another part of your question, which is how has it influenced me as I sort of moved into my career, I think all those varieties of work really meant that I really had to build up a muscle of influence. Now, I do a lot of CTO coaching. I train a lot of tech leaders. And I think in particular, learning how to influence other people is one of those key skills. And as a consultant, you have to do that all the time if you're going to have any impact, because typically you don't get to make decisions. Typically you're working through other managers or your sponsor to make a decision. And you have to work to influence a lot of people to get stuff done. And so for me, I think there was a lot of times or relationship building, of knowing who to talk to and finding ways to build those relationships helped me build influence and also gave me motive to actually help other people as well in a positive fashion. And I think that's definitely shaped a lot of my career and sort of what I'm doing these days.
You mentioned Oracle, and when I think about the product from the product perspective, about the Oracle and N26 or Tier Mobility, those are completely different organizations. So I'm just and ThoughtWorks is another story from the consultancy perspective. But I mean, switching from Australia, from those organizations to more of a startup world of Tier Mobility or N26. I'm just wondering, was there anything surprising for you, like cultural wise, or approach how they build the products, or how they do engineering, how they build teams? Like, was there any surprising?
To be honest, not so much, because even within ThoughtWorks, even though many of our clients would have been maybe enterprises, I had over those 14 years, long time, working with sometimes startup environments, right? So I know how scrappy that sort of phase has to be. You don't have all the time, you don't have all the budget to get stuff done. You need to build a good product, and you need to iterate quite a lot. And so I kind of had a good exposure to company life cycles at different stages. And if anything, what it did was it helped me prepare for understanding what problems we were going to have at different sizes and scales. So for instance, one of the reasons I joined 1026 is they had a really solid engineering team, but it wasn't growing very fast. And we needed to grow it very quickly because the rest of the company had already outgrown it ratio-wise. And also, the rest of the company was going to grow a lot more. And so we had a lot of catching up to do. As you can imagine, and you probably also know, it's hard to hire good people in tech, whereas there are a lot of other people who can label themselves very quickly as product people or business people, telling people what to do with more projects. That's easy. Shipping quality product or shipping a product at all that works is already a challenge. And so I kind of knew all of the different challenges that we're going to have. And although I didn't necessarily know if it was going to always work out, at least I had a portfolio of different approaches that we could experiment with that gave me better chances of going, okay, well, I think here's what we're facing. Here are some things that we need to be able to do around that, because I've seen this work in different types of companies. And so that gave me a lot more preparation for the circumstances I'd find myself in.
Let's talk now about N26. This is really hot startup, hot fintech in Germany. And the facts are that you scaled the team from 55 people to 250 in 18 months, as far as I remember. So that's impressive, I would say. You worked there as a CPO, but in the end, you work there as a chief scientist, which is a bit different role when I'm like looking at the titles. I'm just wondering, what are your biggest lessons learned from this company for yourself as a leader?
Yeah. So firstly, I think if anyone has learnt about the CTO role, is that there are a lot of varieties of that role. And when I was there in the early parts, it was pretty clear that my role was going to be about scaling up the organization. Now, typically in a organization, you typically have a VP of engineering and a CTO. And it's the VP of engineering that's typically responsible for hiring and staffing and keeping an organization running from that sort of side. So I knew that was going to be part of my responsibility because I didn't have a VP of engineering at that time. And so part of my role of what I saw myself doing early days at N26 was really about building out the management leadership layers so that we could scale effectively, right? So, moving from a team of 55 people, you can kind of get a sense of what's going on everywhere. But when you get to several offices around the world, several hundred people in engineering, you literally can't do everything yourself. And that's why you have to grow a good management team effectively. And so that's one of the responsibilities I had. And so as I brought in a sort of more senior manager, we called it a director in our leveling system, but it's kind of conceptually like a VP of engineering. Then I could actually step back to focus a little bit more on what a CTO might typically more do, which is really talk about, the tech side, right? Making sure that we have a good tech strategy heading in the right direction, making sure that we're investing in the right types of quality, and that particularly the engineering team have good levels of experience and have access to that experience to make sure that you can continue to build a quality product over time. And so that's one of the reasons that I moved into sort of the chief scientist role, is because the CTO role in that sort of world was going to be a little bit more focused on delivery, staffing, and org. And so we needed a different title around that. And we can sort of think about it as moving back into a little bit more of the individual contributor track, where you have to use a lot more leadership influence. But it's really more focused on sort of technical topics than it is about the organizational operating side.
So just to dig deeper in. So in this case, the CTO moved a bit into the role of a VP of engineering, right? So
You could
this is what.
describe it that way, yes. It's the responsibilities would be more typically what a VP engineering would do.
Okay. Um, and the tier mobility. This is interesting point because I know that you're helping a lot of tech leaders. I mean, C-level, VP level, head level. And at the tier mobility, you work as a board in a board of advisory role, and this is really interesting point because like when you look at somebody LinkedIn and you see board advisory role, it's not always obvious how this work looks day to day. Like what kind of responsibilities do you have? How does it look to have this kind of work? So maybe you could describe a bit your relationship with the tier mobility and your role there.
Yeah, so I will also say the advisory role also differs from context to context. And in the context of the tier mobility, it was the sort of advisory board for the CTO in that side. So Matthias, who was the CTO and one of the co-founders of Tier, assembled effectively his own personal board of advisors. And so this was his collection of people, people he trusted, who had different backgrounds and experiences, but could draw upon whenever he had specific situations that he needed some extra help with. And so the way that worked was a little bit more on-demand advisory, which is, hey, we're starting to grow. We need a leveling system. Pat, you know how these work, so can you help our team, build out a leveling system so that there's more clarity around that? Sometimes it was just there to be a external person for sort of advice around particular topics. So, when one of the directors at Tier had a certain challenge, I could create some time and we could talk through what they're currently going. A little bit like how I normally do things with coaching with the CTOs that I normally run. But sometimes it's a little bit more, I would say, mentoring or advice than it is pure coaching from that side. And so that's how we operated it there at Tier.
I mean, when I look at your profile, I think like you are pretty successful in tech. I mean, like you work for a really big organization, you work for the startups that are well known, and you have like recognition because like people hire you to help them out with some like high level like executive ideas. I mean, on a technology or engineering side. So I'm just wondering, why are you where you are today? To what do you attribute your success?
So thank you, firstly. I appreciate that. And I will say that I think success comes in many different forms. And now I'm independent and I do a lot of training for early tech leads or staff engineers and engineering managers. And then I coach CTOs and also run training through the Tech Lead Academy. But one of the reasons I think I'm here is of this concept called Ikigai. Now, some of the people who are watching or listening to this might be familiar with it, but if you're not, Ikigai is this Japanese concept, and I always forget all the different elements, but roughly it's what you enjoy doing, intersection with what you're good at, intersected with what the world needs, and intersected with how you can earn money. And so, I think I'm quite lucky in that I fell into the tech industry versus maybe some other industries that are maybe diminishing because of other advances or other types of fields. I feel that I focus a lot in growing people. I think that was a consistent level of strength feedback that I had in reviews of helping others grow, particularly as leaders and managers. And there's definitely need for that in our industry because we have so many first-time tech leads, managers, directors, VPs, and CTOs that they need support. And I'm fortunate that we have companies that have budget that can actually do that. And so I will say that at least how I found the sort of intersection of Ikigai is a little bit of serendipity. It's not something like I planned this for 20 years and this is how I ended up in. But I am sort of quite lucky that I think the intersection of all of these elements did mix. But I will also go back and say that there are many different definitions of success, right? So for some people, what is important to you might be about having a stable family situation and having a consistent income stream, right? And that's something that some environments will suit better than others. And I think success is very, dependent on how you define it and frame it, but there are also many variations of it.
I think you are very modest saying that. I still think that we should celebrate a bit our successes and where we are and appreciate it. I'm saying it because I'm doing the same. I'm not saying that I'm any kind successful, right? Because it's always like the way that you can go further. But I still think, and what I see from the outside in our talks, like when we talk over a coffee in Berlin and when we are talking today, I think that you are really good in like orchestrating the people and building the kind of structures around it and help to make it work. This is what I see from the outside. But let's dig deeper in this training consulting because I feel this is the thing that you do and you like to do the most currently. And based on your experience and what you're saying, you are doing more and more those kind of engagements. And when you're talking with those leaders, like a C-level, VP level, I'm just wondering about some patterns or maybe some about some problems that those guys are having, that maybe you see something similar, like the common problem that they have, and you don't see it from the outside because it's really hard probably for them to share. They share with you, And of course, we don't have to go into details, but maybe some kind of like a glimpse inside of the conversation that we are having.
Yeah, so one of the common problems that I see a lot is, if you are a more senior leader or manager in a company, like a director or a CTO, you need a strong management or leadership team. Now, often people get promoted into these roles, or they hire, but in a good place, you also promote people into those roles. Often those people are going to be doing these management roles or director roles for the first time. And this is where, they're going to be making a lot of mistakes. And I know this as a director or more senior manager of other managers. It's challenging because you sort of know what you don't want, but you want to give people that sort of freedom. And often you want people to maybe work in a certain way, or you expect certain things from people, but they're not always meeting those expectations because they're effectively in a new role. And so one of the reasons often a lot of people ask me to come in and train their tech leads or engineering managers in particular is because if you're a director, you typically don't have a lot of time. You can't sit down and sort of teach and sort of coach people through all the skills and expectations. And it's often helpful to have somebody external to do that, because you won't be able to carve out all of that time in your schedule. I think a lot of other people, there is a difference between being able to do a skill and then also to be able to teach a skill. And so even if you know what it looks like, some people don't have that skill to teach or the patience to teach of the many different varieties of how things work. And so I have been sort of teaching and training people for about a decade. And so I know all the different variations of things that people will ask about. What about these situations, that situation, particularly when they're leading or managing a new team? But I think that's a very common problem that a lot of organizations have, which is they put a lot of people into these roles and they want them to be successful because they've been successful in previous roles. But often there are a lot of inexperienced people because they're doing new responsibilities and they're building skill on the job. But at the same time, the people who are managing them don't have the time to teach and coach and work with them, or they need faster results as a result. And so that's a very common thing at all different parts of an organization, unless you're lucky enough to hire always in the experienced people. But then you limit the amount of growth that people can have from other sort of parts of the organization. And often you sometimes bring in people who don't necessarily fit culturally because they're bringing in a very different culture from their old workplaces.
Based on what you said, I would add to this, like, they don't have time to coach or like time, space to coach. I would add like the skills to coach the people, because sometimes, like, this is based on my experience,
Yeah,
right? I
absolutely.
feel like I'm really bad manager. So and I feel like I don't have enough skills, and somebody else it's better at like skilling up my people. So I think this is the sometimes the thing that we omit, or it's hard for us as a leaders to agree and say like, I don't know something.
Yep.
And it comes maybe with time, where you put the ego in the pocket and you could like tell to somebody, I don't have a clue how to do it. Like, we need somebody to help us out.
You're absolutely right. And that's exactly why people bring in external people who can help bring in that skill or when it's needed.
Let's talk more about your experiences, and I think we learn, and the people like to listen others, let's say, case studies based on others' experience. I'm just wondering about your hardest, like, what are the hardest things that you have ever done? Like, when you look at your career, when you look at what you have done in 26, in tier mobility, in ThoughtWorks, could you tell like any case study, like the hardest things that you have ever done, like how you deal with the situation, how you went through it, and like what was the outcome for you?
Sure. I will say one of the benefits of working in a consulting environment is there are a lot of things that you cannot control. And you end up in places where if you chose to work there, you probably wouldn't. And so part of that, I think, is learning a bit of resilience. A really good example of that is I was asked once to help a team because there was a team that was doing some estimation and the client didn't like the results of the estimation. right? So they're like, oh, well, these timelines are too long. Why is it taking so long? And so there were questions around the planning process and how did they end up with these timelines. And so they asked me to come in, help this team. We went through their sort of planning process. We went through the items of work that they had, how they came up with their sizing, the estimates and assumptions. And then the plan seemed reasonably solid, right? It's not necessarily going to be precise, accurate, but it's roughly about the time frame that they were talking about. We were talking about, I think, a time frame of 9 months at that time. This was for the replacement of a sort of master service about customer information. The team had to present this to their management group, and in this management group, there was a ex-Goldman Sachs director who was managing this team. And I remember this very vividly because we had the development team there, we had the project sponsor from the client, and then there was the first time that I'd met this director person who was managing this entire department. And the team and I were starting to talk about, how the timelines were reached, what went into that. And all of a sudden, this manager started screaming and shouting, right, about why this is unacceptable. I could get teams working around the clock on this 24/7. We're going to be done in like 2 months. I can't at all understand how this thing is going to be the 6 to 9 months sort of time frames that the team was sort of talking about. Obviously, as a consultant, you can't do anything, right? You have to kind of effectively eat it up. And I think that sort of awkward situation that you find yourself in, there's no sense in arguing back. There's no sense in shouting back. That's only going to escalate the problem. But learning how to cope with these, what I would describe as very stressful situations, is something that you definitely learned. Now, funny story about this situation. Obviously, we didn't continue with this client. We didn't win the work. But our salesperson kept in touch with this client. They had commissioned a sort of outsourcing firm, an Indian outsourcing firm who had 3 teams working around the clock. And our salesperson checked in 18 months later, and they were still not done with this project. So, you could try, but, work is essential work. And sometimes things do take longer than expected.
I think that's a great story. Amazing experience. So this is something that we don't hear very often, and the people think that in tech, everything it's like peaceful, calm, perfect energy, yin and yang. But it's not like that. So I experienced that kind of stuff in the past, the same. And my lessons learned from those kind of experiences, of course, you don't want to work with this client, but sometimes this happened because somebody had like a bad day or like a hard time, like on a private let's say, area. And what I really like to it's that you need to wait, the person needs to shout, they need to give away the emotion, and you talk like another day. And then you talk more reasonably, and sometimes it worked out because we are just humans. But this case, like what you described, it's like I think it's a perfect case study.
Yeah, thanks.
Pat, so the last 2 questions that I want you to ask. So I really enjoy digging deeper into like your lessons learned because you have a lot of interesting cases. And I'm just wondering if you remember like your most important lesson learned which shaped you as a leader in tech, which changed your way of thinking, maybe.
There's a lot. I don't know if there's just one. But I can give you another example that I think has shaped how I think about giving things away to other people. And another consulting story here, a lot of interesting stories, lots of lessons learned, was working with a client that had very, very tough deadlines. There was a lot of stress to get things shipped within a certain time frame. As a result, they wanted to spin up teams very, very quickly. Right? They're like, can we have 50 people tomorrow starting to work on a system? I'm like, okay, you can't necessarily have 50 people working on the same code base because like they're not going to do anything. They're going to be stepping on each other's toes. So we talked about how we could ramp up as quick as we could, have parallelized. Now, at some point, I was personally managing a team of about 20 people. I was trying to do the best thing that I could that I felt was reasonable at the time. So, in those days, I was working or trying to work ahead of the team, working with product, or in that case, the business analyst, trying to work out, scope out work effectively to make sure that there was relatively good assumptions around it so that things were ready to be picked up by a development team. Now, as you can imagine, I was a big bottleneck in trying to do this for a team of about 20 people. And in trying to feed a number of streams of work, at some point, I realized it wasn't going to work very well. I physically became sick. So I lost my voice. I was like, I had a cold. I wasn't sleeping very well just because of all the things that were going on. And I was sent home for 2 days, effectively saying, Pat, you need to take a break and just get some rest. Now, after that time frame, that was handy because I had some time to reflect. And I think at that time, even though I was laying in bed most of the time, I could sort of think about, well, if I go back into the workplace, this isn't necessarily going to change. Like, I'm going to be healthier. But if I go back to what I was doing before, I'm just going to end up in the same place. And I think this is one of the big things I learned with systems thinking is you want to change the system so it's more sustainable over time. And so I was like, well, what led me to where I am now? And what needs to change as a result? And when I thought about it from that perspective, one of the things that I introduced when I came back was I started to introduce this idea of feature leads. So a scoped area where I could delegate a certain level of responsibility, and those nominated feature leads would effectively do the same work I was doing, but scoped in a smaller area. So I worked out how to break up work into small delegable pieces. So there was one person that was responsible for the operational stuff. So the release pipeline, the sort of release process. There was another person that was more responsible for the sort of security side. So the authorization and other security mechanisms that we needed to put in place. Another person was responsible then for, in that time, it was a CMS with a sort of different web app front end. So we had two different leads that were leading different sort of architectural pieces there. And my role there was then to sort of orchestrate that, make sure that everyone was in alignment at a high level. That helped tremendously, and it showed me the power of better delegation. I was used to delegating tasks, but delegating areas of ownership, that wasn't something that I was yet ready for. And so that's something that sometimes you think, well, I'm doing things to help other people, but actually other people are ready to actually take on more scope than you think they can be. And so that's something that I've carried with me since that experience.
Awesome. Thank you. So the last question that I have, it's about any books, podcasts, conferences, or any given type of resources that have been particularly helpful for you as a leader that you could recommend.
Ooh. So I think it's interesting because I started my career a long time ago, and I was reflecting on this actually in a recent talk where I reflected on 10 years of teaching other people. And when I first started, there weren't that many great resources or books, certainly no podcasts back then. One of the books that was very formative to my own journey, it's a little bit hard to get a hold of because I'm not so sure it's in print anymore, is Jerry Weinberg's Becoming a Technical Leader. It's actually on the shelf behind me. So that was a very effective book that helped me. And another book that helped me think sort of organizationally and about systems thinking was Peter Seng's The Learning, I've forgotten the name of it, but it's the book about the fifth discipline. It's about the learning organization, and talked about why organizations don't learn, and introduced the concepts of systems thinking for me. So those would be two things that I would say had a big impact on my own career.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Pat, for a really interesting conversation and sharing the personal stories that you have. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for having me on here.
Thanks.
Follow Matt on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Better Tech Leadership newsletter.